Hi, I'm Darrin Peppard. Welcome to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, the podcast dedicated to today's hardworking leader. Join me every Sunday for leadership insight, inspiration, and a little pep talk to keep you rolling down your road to awesome. All right, everybody, welcome into episode number 104 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. And today on the show, my guest is Johnathan Cranford. Now, Johnathan has 7 years of experience as a special education teacher on a therapeutic campus for students with emotional disturbance, and another 4 years of in-school suspension teacher experience at 2 different middle schools. And after discovering how in-school suspension programs were failing to meet the needs of his most at-risk students, Johnathan created his own successful in-school suspension program to address discipline, academic, and restorative requirements that his student population needed the most. Once creating this program on 2 different campuses, he made the decision to create this into a roadmap and released it as a book titled The Art of In-School Suspension. You're going to hear from Johnathan today as he and I sit down and talk about ways to make your in-school suspension room an effective, positive, reinforcing intervention rather than just a room where kids go to escape from accountability. You're going to hear that conversation and so much more right here on Leaning into Leadership, and we'll be right back. October is National Principals Month, and here at Road to Awesome, we want to say thank you to all our current, aspiring, and recovering principals around the country. Thank you for the hard work that you do. Thank you for putting in the time. Thank you for being a role model. Thank you for working so diligently on behalf of kids, on behalf of adults, everywhere. You know, the work you do truly makes a difference in your community. And we want to say thank you by offering you a special price on our book, Road to Awesome, The Journey of a Leader. Normally $24.99, you can get Road to Awesome, The Journey of a for only $20 by going to our website, roadtoawesome.net/books, and selecting the book and entering the code FOBA, F-O-B-A. That stands for Fear of Being Awesome. We are here to stamp out the fear of being awesome. And getting the book, Road to Awesome, will help take you right to where you want to be. In the book, we challenge you to identify the things that you really care about, to find the clarity, and then how do you go about being intentional to ensure that your work is focused on those things. It's hard not to be caught up in being a firefighter, but in that book, we're going to challenge you to step away from firefighter world and step into being the leader you're supposed to be on your campus. Thank you again for all the work you do, and happy National Principals Month. When I first started as a school level administrator, my first job, as many of you know, had me in charge of student discipline and student attendance. That, of course, meant that I indirectly oversaw the in-school suspension room. Yes, we had somebody, Miss Becky, who ran our in-school suspension room, but that was something for me to oversee. And an interesting thing about the in-school suspension room that I felt was that no matter what we did, it just didn't seem to be effective. You know, we had the same kids over and over, same behaviors over and over. It was not accomplishing what we wanted it to accomplish. So fortunately, folks, for those of you who are in that position, my guest on the show today is perfect to help solve some of those problems. Johnathan Cranford has written the book on the art of ISS, actually oversees an ISS room. He's not just telling you what you should do. This is what he does, and offers professional development, all kinds of really cool stuff. Johnathan, thank you so much for joining me here on Leaning into Leadership.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here to talk about in-school suspension.
Yeah, and you know what? Nobody ever says that, but this is an important conversation. It really is, and I know you say it. And I'm honestly excited to have this conversation about in-school suspension because I think it can be effective. I think it can be something that works very well. So before we dive into the nuts and bolts, the meat and potatoes of the ISS conversation, share just a little bit of kind of the journey that led you to just jump into this opportunity for in-school suspension, and not just jump in, but to remain and continue to work forward, write a book about it, the whole bit?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I've spent the last 11 years in teaching, going to my 12th year now. The first 7 years, I was at a therapeutic campus for students with emotional disturbance. So I taught high school English on the therapeutic campus for the first 7 years, and then I got into ISS for the last five. Um, I actually wasn't even going to go into ISS in school suspension. What happened was I was looking to change from the therapeutic campus. After 7 years, I felt like I'd done my part for God and country. And I was looking to make a move, and I was going to teach nutrition on a high school campus. I have it's a passion of mine. I'm a level 2 CrossFit coach. I've been doing that for as long as I've been teaching. And one of the things I do is I give the nutrition seminars at our gym. So it's nutrition is a passion of mine. I thought I could just really crush it as a nutrition teacher. I have the certification, so I go into the interview. And it wasn't really quite it just wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. So my wife just tells me, hey, we have this in-school suspension position at my campus. Why don't you check it out? I think you'd be amazing at it. And so I went over there and interviewed, and they brought me in. I think the most important thing for your audience to know about me is that my wife and daughter are both school teachers, and majority of my friends are as well. So when I approached the in-school suspension position, which was basically like, here's the keys, go do your best. I knew what the issues were going into it from the teacher's perspective. I knew how it wasn't serving them already. So it wasn't just for me. It wasn't just about about the students. It was also about how can I serve these teachers who are doing the most difficult job in the world, which is teaching middle school. So I go in there and I implement in the first year some what are to me common sense rules and procedures. And within a few months, I have teachers running up to me in the hallway with like, hey, my student had like 5 zeros in the grade book, and now they're all caught up, and they do all their work. They're getting more done with you in a couple of days than they'll do all week. What's going on? And they're also telling me that the kids are having different conversations about in-school suspension. They're letting them people know they have had a positive experience there, but that they don't want to go back. And the way children communicate that is they'll say, well, Mr. Cranford's cool, but ISS sucks, because that's how kids talk. So, right. So after, like that was my first year. It's going to become more than that, but that was just year one. So I knew we're having some success. The entire staff was noticing. By year two, the district starts to notice, and they start sending a bunch of people into my room, other in-school suspension teachers. They want to see a model ISS room. They're sending behavior specialists. At one point, they have an entire other school district that they're mentoring on PBIS implementation. And so I have an associate superintendent in my room and like a bunch of other people from this other district. It's like 15 people. And this is more attention than I've ever received in my education career. So, and it's not just a walkthrough. They're like in there for 45 minutes taking notes and asking me questions. So I start asking questions in my district. I'm like, is there any other, rooms that are working like this? And they're saying, well, nobody's doing what you're doing. So that makes me even more curious. So I start asking around to other teachers in the other districts outside of mine. I'm in the Houston area, and we have 30 districts that just surround HISD. I'm one of the surrounding districts, and I know teachers in all of them. And one thing I've noticed is when you ask somebody, what if their in-school suspension room is good or not, or what they think of their ISS, they're either going to tell you one of two things. They're either going to say, oh, our ISS room is a joke. The kids love it there. They go and they watch Marvel movies on their phones and they sleep. Or they're going to tell you, yeah, I think our ISS room is pretty good. But then when you follow up and ask, well, how do you get work to the teacher, stuff like that, then they're like, oh, well, we don't expect to get work back from in-school suspension, but he makes them, sit in there all day and they hate it. And, that's not school. That's just kids doing time. So I get more curious and I start kind of doing some research outside of Texas and all around. And what I found is if you look at the data, in-school suspension is right up there with out-of-school suspension. The efficacy is pretty low. It's not, when we suspend kids, who are we even pretending to help, right? So if we give them in-school suspension, it's supposed to be better, but the data is not showing that. And I know why now. So that was kind of when the light bulb went off. I was like, oh, people just need to start doing things a little more intentionally, doing what I'm doing, have some better systems in place. And you can have a functional in-school suspension room that does a lot more on your campus than probably what it's currently doing. So that was what made me decide to write the book, The Art of In-School Suspension.
Yeah, I love that. Lots of really, really good stuff in there, and a lot that I want to unpack. Let's go just kind of at here's where I want to go. I want to go with a conversation that a thread that you put in there. I want to kind of pull on it. You mentioned that you would ask people about how do you get work to the teacher, or how do teachers get work to the in-school suspension room. Now, I think in some cases, people have a system in place. In some cases, they don't. Obviously, in almost any way or in any walk, it's critical to have systems in place. But specifically, when we're talking about getting work to and from the in-school suspension room, I've seen a bunch of different things, Johnathan. I'll be honest with you. I go back to my time as a classroom teacher, and 2 different buildings, 2 very different systems there. One, the principal or the assistant principal came around and got the work. In one, the kid had a form that you had to fill out as a teacher. To all kinds of different things. And I'm curious, what are the effective ways to answer that question? How do we best go about ensuring that student work? Because I know you're going to talk a little bit more about your structures in your classroom with how kids are getting work done, but it starts with getting the work in their hands. So how do you do that?
Right. Yeah, it starts with getting the work in my hands. It's crucial. It's crucial that we have work to start the day with. Not even, we're not wanting to get it by 5th period or whenever people get around to it. We need it right away. So we need a pretty streamlined system for that. And it needs to be as easy on the teachers as possible, because it has to come from the teachers. We don't want to do busy work in there. We don't want to do stuff that is not really contributing to their learning. What I tell clients now is, we do, in-school suspension, targeted behavior intervention with 0 loss of instruction. So that's what we're looking for, is 0 loss of instruction. We want the work to come from the teachers. We want it to be their work. And then we want to start working on it to get it done. The way we do it is with a spreadsheet system, so that we can communicate on that spreadsheet with the teachers. And just spreadsheet and email it's pretty simple. So first, an email will go out specifically to the teachers who have a kid in school suspension. In most systems, my district, we have a system that you can basically do it with. You can email an entire kid's schedule with one button in a program called Skyward. And I think a lot of school districts have something similar to that, or you just have to email their schedule. But it can't go out to the whole staff. It needs to go out specifically to those teachers. Otherwise, if it goes out to everyone, it goes out to no one. They'll stop looking for it. And then, the other half of that is, when they do send work, you need to make sure that it gets back to them, that they're actually getting completed work back. The kids are learning. Otherwise, I feel like I have to earn it from my teachers. Otherwise, why should they send me work if it's just going to be extra on their plate? Nothing's going to be done. So that's very important. And then the spreadsheet that we use, once the email goes out, there's a link to the spreadsheet, and they can then, it's kind of divided by grade level and by subject. So you look for your subject and then that kid's name, and then you just put in there what the instructions are, or a link. A lot of our stuff is we use a program called Schoology, or you can use Google Classroom. A lot of stuff is in there nowadays, so you don't even have to print anything out. But if you have a district where it's almost all paperwork, still a lot of paper-based stuff, then you can just put links into the spreadsheet. And then in that situation, I would just have them it'd be handy to have a printer in the ISS room or nearby. So then you can just print out the work and get it right there from the link. You just put the link in the masters and get it right there. So that's pretty streamlined, I think.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And, I think obviously the more that technology has evolved and the more that classes or schools have embraced that technology, obviously that makes things a lot easier to move that back and forth. I'm curious, this is well, I don't use a script, but I'm just going to say I'm going off script here because something that you said there just kind of sparked a thought in my head, and that's this. You said, we need the work, not like fifth period. We need it right away. I'm curious. This is just a genuine interest question, and I'll share a little bit of some experience leading to the question. As the person in charge of discipline and attendance early in my career, I know there were times where I would have a student report directly to in-school because of whatever infraction, say, start a fourth period. I know there were other times where it was, look, here's the form, go see all your teachers. You're going to be in in-school starting tomorrow. Is there a preferred that a lot of the listeners right now, Johnathan, are school and district level leaders. So you've got their ear. Is there a preferred when and how from the person sitting in the chair who's going to do this work to have the student come in?
Sure. And since I have their ear, let me speak directly to them. This is very important. So in some circles, what I'm doing is called trauma-informed in-school suspension. It doesn't mean, we just hug them and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. They do not want to return. I promise you, it is a behavior intervention and it is an academic intervention. It is both and it works very effectively. But part of it being trauma-informed is we give them some choice and efficacy in how they attack their day. So I have it in my school. My teachers, as mentioned earlier, they get me all the work by first period or before first period. The biggest thing with that, as I mentioned earlier, the real big part, it doesn't matter how streamlined it is, the real big part is knowing and trusting that I'm going to have the kids actually do something that day. I think that's the most important thing, so that the teachers know they're not wasting their time. But it's the reason we give them that choice is so that they don't feel that hopelessness, right? It's part of it being trauma informed, or I call it trauma assumed in school suspension, because we know the trauma is there. They need some efficacy. They know from me that there's not going to be any busy work. There's not going to be, just stuff to pass the time, but we're also not going to waste time. We're going to get something done today. We're going to achieve something. And so if I can give them an opportunity, starting first period, what do you want to work on? Do you want to start with math? You can start with math. You want to start with, your ELA, you can start with ELA. I have a spreadsheet where I track. It's my own spreadsheet. It's not shared with the teachers. It has nothing to do with getting work. It's just me tracking where everybody's at all day long. So once we've finished one core content, because we do core content first, then we move on to the next one. We cross it off the list and move on. That's very powerful because you've got two kinds of students in in-school suspension. They're either going to start with their easiest subject and they're going to build some momentum, move forward to the next one, or they're going to start with their hardest one and get that knocked out and still build momentum. It doesn't matter where they start, but you give them a little bit of choice and some room to breathe, and you get a lot more out of them that way. So that's why it's so important that we get something early on. And it's better to have a kid come in the next day if possible. I have deals with my APs. They know, if it's something silly like the kid, went over on how many tardies they can have, then just put that kid in the next day. That's not an emergency thing. There are obviously times where you just got to throw a kid in there because it's a problem having them in class or having them anywhere in the building at the moment. You need them in a structured environment or in a more restricted environment. If you have to, you have to. But my assistant principals and my principal will try to avoid doing that because they know that the first part of the day is so important and integral to us. It helps us to set the tone, set the expectation, everything, that it makes the rest of the day go smooth. And they know that I can handle if they throw kids in there at, whatever period of the day. But most ISS teachers, it's going to, especially if they're newer, it's going to kind of throw a wrench into things. So, let them win the morning and win the day as much as possible before you start throwing kids in their sixth, fifth, fourth period.
Yeah. And I think I always try to kind of live by that as well. And yeah, there are going to be those moments where you got to do this, but certainly with such an intentional system around supporting kids from the very beginning, obviously, yeah, getting it set up to where the kid knows in advance, the teachers know in advance, and most importantly, you as the person who is the teacher in the ISS room knows in advance. I think that sets everybody else up for success. Hey leaders, let me tell you a story. It's the story of my first year as a high school principal. I will tell you, I was exhausted, I was overwhelmed, and I lived my life breathing through a snorkel because my head was so far underwater, and I didn't think there was a way out. I mean, I was a mess. The 40 feet that it was to move from my assistant principal office down to the principal's office might as well have been a 400-mile trek. I was just absolutely putting in crazy hours. I was trying to do it all, like trying to answer everybody's question, thinking I always had to be the smartest one in the room and I had to solve everybody's problems. We're talking severe Superman syndrome here, folks. Every day was fire after fire, and all I accomplished was putting out fires. Forget about leading. I was simply trying to survive. Now, after working with a leadership coach, I really was able to get things figured out, get my head from being a firefighter to actually being a leader. But it took work, and I discovered some things that really mattered. And that's why I've created Walk in Your Purpose, 5 mindsets to level up your leadership, a free ebook that you can have today at no cost. Just go to walkinyourpurpose.roadtoawesome.net/ebook to download your free copy. Again, that's walkinyourpurpose.roadtoawesome.net/ebook. It's time for you to walk in your purpose, to find joy in your job, and to be the leader you always knew that you could be.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcast. Now let's get back to the episode.
Here's where I want to go in our conversation now. I want to talk a little bit more about the book, The Art of ISS. And there was pieces in the book. I love the entire thing, by the way, but there are a couple of pieces that I just want to hit. I'm going to share like right off. I've got a quote from very early in the book, and I'm going to read that quote. And then I just want you to run with that, talk about, kind of where that came from, or what are your thoughts around it, or what does it spark today in your mind? So 2 or 3 different pieces here, nothing huge. And I don't want to give away the whole book, but I certainly want to take advantage of the opportunity I had to get through the book. So you said early in the book, our responses to student behaviors often reach far beyond what happens in the moments surrounding a particular incident. I think that's connecting to what you were just talking about with trauma assumed, but maybe take that a little deeper.
Yeah, that's part of it. That would be, there's really only 3 major parts to the trauma assumed stuff. It's, no surprises. So they know what the expectation and the response when they fail to meet that expectation is going to be. We empower them through choice. That was what we talked about a moment ago. And then just also what you're getting into is non-energized redirection. So the students always feel safe. So when you think about how you react to a student's behavior, when they're not meeting your expectations, when they're breaking the rules, whatever you want to call it, you always have to take into account that your ability to communicate and their ability to communicate are wildly different. They're children, and you are in 2 different galaxies when it comes to your abilities, right? You're an adult, you have so much more experience. They have their behavior is typically communicating something that they're not able to communicate positive or in a way that makes sense to you. So, their anxiety may manifest as an attitude, or their feeling hopelessness or just frustration at the work or whatever may come out as hostility or work avoidance or whatever you want to call it. So having an emotional response to that is not really helpful. It doesn't make them feel safe. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't mean that you're just going to let it go. But what we do is we've established early in the day, what I call win the morning, win the day. They know what the expectation is. They know what the rules are, and they know what the consequences are and how I'm going to respond in pretty much every situation. And I know how I'm going to respond. So there's no emotion in it. It's just, hey, you are not meeting the expectation here, so I'm going to have to give you a redirection. And then we never escalate. It doesn't get into a power struggle or anything like that. If they do start to come back with something, it's either maybe a planned ignoring, especially if they comply. If they say something rude and then they comply, I just pretty much ignore it because that's just junk behavior. But if it's something like they're not complying, then and they're being rude, I'll just give them some wait time. And we'll do like what I call a behavior cluster. It doesn't go on to the next redirection or to the next strike or whatever you want to call it. It just goes, we have a cluster of behaviors, and then, we give them some wait time, and then we come back to it. And if they're still not on task or doing what they're supposed to do or behaving the way they're supposed to, then maybe we go to the next step. But it's just part of not having an emotional response, because that's what they're going to remember, is the emotional response that you had versus what you really want them to learn or to know. That's where that came from.
I really like that. Next one that I want to talk about. You have a bit of a section in here where you talk about what ISS is and what it isn't. Maybe, I don't know, give us a couple of each.
Sure. On my website, wow, there's like an entire pyramid of the efficacy of most ISS rooms. And the very bottom, what you don't want is the worst. It's actually hurting you to have the in-school suspension room that I call a reinforcing in-school suspension room, because it's reinforcing all the wrong behaviors. It's reinforcing the negative behaviors. So what that looks like is, the ISS teacher maybe is trying or tried at some point, but it's been rough in there, so they've kind of given up. And now they're just like, hey, look, as long as y'all are quiet, then I'm not going to bother you. Just keep it quiet. And so then they're, getting to play on their video games on their school-issued laptop. They're sleeping, they're eating snacks all day. They're communicating on social media. They're just doing whatever they want as long as they're semi-quiet, because they're not going to actually be quiet in that sort of environment. But that's just somebody trying to survive. And what that begets is worse behaviors on campus, because the kids are actually having fun in there at that point. It's kind of rewarding the negative behavior. It's reinforcing it. So then they go back to a classroom sort of emboldened in their negative behaviors, and it gets worse. It can spread. I've seen it to where it can, go to other classrooms where the teacher wasn't really having classroom management issues, or they're decent at it, but then the kid just realizes that there's no tier 2 support anywhere in this school. There's no tier 2 consequence or anything. There's no intervention. It's just, we're literally just playing school with this kid, and they figure it out because they're smart. And now they know that there's nothing that they can do to, really, they're going to talk to me. They're going to give me positive reinforcement. They're going to do all this stuff, but there's really no true MTSS because the tier 2 intervention is lacking. It's just not there. And in fact, it's worse. It's reinforcing. So once the kid figures that out, then it can get pretty rough, because we're just putting it on their hands to play nicely at this point. So yeah, it can't be a reinforcing ISS room. You don't want to see that. It's not a video game. I think in the book I said it's not an arcade where you get to play video games. Yeah. It's not social media. It's not nap time. All the things it's not social hour. I mean, I could list them all probably for you. It's none of those things, right? It's what it really is an academic intervention at its heart. That's what I really want it to be more than anything, because that helps out my teachers. But it's also a behavior intervention, and we get a lot done in there. There's a lot I can promise you with a functional in-school suspension room. I mean, we're talking about, grade repair. We're backfilling deficits and things that they didn't learn in 5th or 4th grade. We're doing great stuff in there. And that's what it can be at its highest level. At the next worst level, though, if you get above a reinforcing room, then what you have is that room where, through, I guess, fear and intimidation, you have a teacher who is just making them sit there and hate their life, but they're not really getting much done either. They might get a few, like the person may give them some pep talks or something, which is not really that effective. I mean, usually that's about, if I'm giving a kid a pep talk and feeling like I really got through to them, that's usually about my own ego, not anything else. It's, because then they're right back in there for, something else the next day. Right. Yeah, those pep talks aren't as effective as we think they are. But having a true tier 2 intervention is. So so if you have a room where kids are just sitting in there doing time, then that's not academically beneficial to anybody, and not the teachers certainly, because then you're setting them back 1 to 3 days behind in instruction. So who does that help? Nobody. So those are the levels of efficacy. That's what you don't want the ISS room to be. That's what 99% of them are, unfortunately, according to data. It can be that top level, though, where it's going way above and beyond what you ever expected. It's hard to get folks to see that, because so few people have ever had anything like that. on their campus. And teachers even. When I first come to a new campus, I've done in-school suspension at 2 campuses now where I'm the in-school suspension teacher. I've worked on some other campuses as like to help train their in-school suspension teacher as well. But on my primary campus, when I come to a new campus, I have to tell them like, hey, I know you're, whatever, if you're not used to getting work back from school suspension, those days are done. I'm going to help you do all these things. You can even send kids to me. Sometimes we'll talk and see if you have a kid who needs to come there to just for a quiet environment to work on a test, or maybe they're not getting anything done in class in the last couple of days and need them to catch up, just stuff that they're like, that is unbelievable. What are you talking about? That sounds like a fantasy. And I'm like, just, it'll happen. Just, trust me. And then, it takes them a little while, but they see it. But it's hard to imagine if you've never had anything like that on your campus.
Yeah, that's for sure. So I'm compelled to shift directions because I'm thinking about, as schools are opening up, through the course of this fall, we're going to have people who are leading the ISS room for the very first time. You've started it in 2 different schools. You train and coach people in this work. What are like 1 or 2 things that you tell anybody who's new to the space or who's just like, okay, I'm fed up, I'm done, I need to fix this? Where do they begin?
Infrastructure. I call it infrastructure. And that is what we talked about earlier, getting the word out to the teachers what students of theirs have in school suspension and making it easy for them to get work to the teacher. That's the first, everything starts there. Then inside the room, we have structure. You've got to lay out your structure. So you have all of your rules, they're posted. I'm very in depth about my rules. I have about 10 of them. It covers pretty much everything you're going to see in an in-school suspension room. And my response, we're open about what the behavior ladder is. It's not a secret. Nothing in there is a secret. There's no surprises. So, once you have that structure in place, the infrastructure to feed it, then it's all about win the morning, win the day. Those are the big 3 right there. If you can get that far, if you can win the morning by, when I say win the morning, win the day, that's going over in detail your behavior ladder first. This is what's going to happen if you don't meet expectations. Then give it the rules. Here's what's going to get you in trouble in here. Here's how the day's going to go. Here is when lunch is going to be. Here's how we go to the restroom. Here is when we go to the restroom. Here's how everything works. Then and then from there, it's okay. What do you want to start working on? I'm going to go around the room in numerical order, and you're going to tell me what you want to start on, and I'll make sure we have it here for you. And I'm going to write it down when you're as soon as you got started. If you need anything, you need any help, raise your hand. Believe it or not, I'm a real teacher. I can help you with anything you need in here. And then get them going. And then it's kind of on the teacher to start what I call look for the invisible hand. That's something I have to teach the new folks, which is, I tell them, please raise your hand and ask for help because I do want to, be a teacher. I'm not just a babysitter. So if you come in my in-school suspension room, you're going to see a kid at my desk all the time. It's very uncommon for me not to be working with somebody. But when I say the invisible hand, now I'm talking about, the kid, I'm looking for clues like, are they sitting there on question 5 for the last 10 minutes and we haven't had any motion, right? They're not, a lot of these tier 2 type students are not going to raise their hand and ask for help because that's not really served them up to this point. That behavior hasn't really served them, or they're just, they're just not that focused on it. So I look for the invisible hand to be raised and then I just call them over. I don't ask them like, hey, do you need some help? Because they're just going to say, no, I'm good. Just bring them to my desk. Hey, just bring your Chromebook up here. Let's look at this. Let's look at this. Show me this work you're working on. And then we just get started and we go. Don't give them an exit strategy. Don't give them a way out. Don't give them an off ramp to not do work.
There you go. That's good stuff. We've reached that point in this show, Johnathan, where I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. What are you doing right now to lean into leadership?
Well, in-school suspension is a leadership-like position because you are so tied into the entire school. Like you're working with the assistant principals and the principals on behavior stuff. You're working with every teacher in the building. If you look at, people don't really get how big the job is when you're trying to do it right. Because if you have 8 kids in your room, which is not a really particularly large day in school suspension, but it's a good sized day, 8 kids, times 8 teachers. That's a lot. And that's a lot of organization that you need to, make sure it happens. Are we getting everybody done? Do we have to map test some of these kids? Do we have to, what do we have to get done? So there's a lot there. So what I've learned this year, this is new for me, and this is only my second year at this campus that I'm at. When I work with teachers, one of the cool things about my campus is I get to do a lot of extra. We don't have versus a Title I school that I've worked at where we're just slammed with kids all the time. This school has a smaller census, so I can do more because I'll have less kids. So there's a lot of extra stuff I can do to help kids, like provide tutoring in my room. I'm like, hey, you can send me kids, that just for one period. They're not in ISS. They're just coming to me for tutoring, but it's quiet and I can help them. We just communicate when that needs to happen. That's one of the things I can do. But what I noticed last year when I offered this is that only the teachers I had relationships with and spoke to often were actually doing that. They were actually sending me folks. The rest of them who don't really know me that well, they weren't sending me anyone. So my thing this year, as far as feeling like ISS being a leadership position, is to make more relationships with every teacher on my campus so that I can serve more of them in the way that I was serving, just the small handful that I did last year.
That's outstanding. I mean, we're in a relationship business. It is that simple. I love that you went there. Speaking of relationships, there are going to be those, whether it's somebody who's brand new to leading an in-school suspension room, or it's a school or a district level leader who listened to this podcast and they want to reach out and start a relationship with you. How did they get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, you can go to my website, www.theartofiss.com. That's theartofiss.com. Reach out to us there. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at Mr. Cranford ISS. Just reach out to me on those two platforms. It's probably the best way to get a conversation going.
That's perfect. I'll make sure to put those links in the show notes, along with a link for you to go grab a copy of the Art of ISS book. Folks, believe me, it's worth the read. It's fantastic. Johnathan Cranford, thank you so much for joining me here on Leaning into Leadership.
Thank you, Darrin.
I really do appreciate Johnathan coming on and sharing some of that insight with us. That's a space that I think a lot of us struggle with. I know, and I talked about it during the actual recording, that as the person who is in charge of discipline and attendance, I never really felt like we had that room as effective as it could be. Some of the strategies that Johnathan talked about, we had in place, but a lot of the stuff we did not. And greatly appreciate him. Hopefully you can take some of those great leadership nuggets and put them to use in your school. And now it's time for a pep talk. Today on the pep talk, I just simply want to talk about letting go and letting the pressure relief valve do its job. Several times this week, I had conversations with leaders across the country who had a very similar challenge, and that is staff members who, needed to let off some steam. Folks, it's okay for those things to happen. It really is. In fact, as leaders, I would encourage you right now to increase the amount of time that you are in the classrooms, in the hallways, and at the front door, because this increases your availability. It gives you more opportunity for your staff to share their frustrations. Rather than having them take their frustrations and stir that throughout the staff, and maybe even stir up things that aren't even accurate, giving you more and more work, more things you have to work to contain. You being available, you being out and about, you being available for people to talk to share their frustrations with, that gives you the opportunity to help ensure that accurate information is out there. And you know what? If somebody's really frustrated, let them share that with you. It's okay. It's normal. I mean, we all have to let off that steam, right? People want to be heard. Give them that opportunity. If what they're sharing isn't accurate or what they're hearing isn't accurate, make sure that you're actually giving them the accurate information. Help them understand why you made a decision. And honestly, if you made a decision and it wasn't a good one, own it. You know what? We're human beings. We all make mistakes, right? Okay. This week, take the extra time. Put 10 minutes on your calendar on Monday. Put 10 minutes on your calendar for Wednesday where you can go and just be a little bit more available. I know you're bogged down. You got all kinds of paperwork. You got all kinds of reports, and now you're into evaluation season. I get it. It's 10 minutes. Put it on your calendar. Get out and about. Make yourself available, folks. It's going to make a difference for you people, and it's going to make a difference for you. Thank you for joining me here on Leaning Into Leadership. Have a road to awesome week. Thank you for listening to the Leaning Into Leadership podcast, brought to you by Road to Awesome. Don't forget, click subscribe, give a review, and share this with somebody who might also enjoy leaning into leadership.